So now getting to why you are all here, we have three amazing panelists that are with us here tonight. Liv Houser, she is an outpatient therapist at Ethos. She received her, I'm going to just directly read from your bio here, Liv. She received her master's in mental health counseling from Immaculata University. Liv has experience working with young adults, couples, and families dealing with substance use and co-occurring mental health conditions. Liv utilizes psychoeducation, motivational interviewing, experiential, cognitive behavioral therapy, family systems, as well as psychodynamic theory to tailor each client's treatment plan to the complexities they are facing on a daily basis. And then we also have Jordan Pearce, an associate therapist at Center for Growth, and I must shout out, was also one of my professors who I really, really like, so thank you. So Jordan is an associate therapist, as I said, at Center for Growth, based in their Ocean City, New Jersey office. While Jordan's special areas of focus include trauma recovery, anxiety, depression, and the unique needs of the LGBTQ community, their training and education has prepared them to work with a wide range of clients seeking support with the diversity of mental health. And then we're also going to hear from Matt, who's on the call. For me, he's right below me. And he will share his personal story. So Matt is a person in recovery. So I believe that we are starting off with Jordan, and Jordan has some slides to share.
Thank you, Kara, so much for not only that great introduction, but also inviting me to be a part of tonight. And so, as Kara mentioned, I'm a therapist working in group practice. I do outpatient therapy right now, but I do have a background in doing some inpatient work and doing work with more intensive addiction intervention. I'm also someone living in recovery myself. I've been in recovery and sober for 13 years now. So I bring a lot of myself into the work that I do. And because I'm a member of the queer community myself, I'm queer and non-binary, working with people living with addiction who are also queer identified, part of this community, just really close to my heart. So I'm just very honored to be here tonight. I'm just going to share very quickly my slides here. And so when I was kind of putting together, thoughts for what would be good to kind of cover tonight and to kind of think about in terms of addiction and this community, I thought about some of the things that I talk about with clients when they first come to see me, when we're doing that intake session, when we're talking with them, when we're diagnosing not only what has been going on in their lives associated with addiction, but also what's been going on in their families and their communities. And I thought, what would be good information for people to have about the social context, the things, the baggage that comes in with people into treatment, and to really understand. And I feel like what I've done is kind of bring together just some information just to kind of give us some context, because this is also part of not just educating the families and loved ones of people with addiction, but I also find very helpful in educating people with addiction, people within the community of addiction, people in recovery, who may be attributing a lot of what they're dealing with to and this is because of social messages that we get, to personal failure, to some personal fault. And we really need to understand that addiction, substance use and abuse exist in a much wider context than that. And that a person coming into treatment is bringing in quite a lot of things beyond just their personal experiences and their personal behaviors. I always like to kind of start with this by just kind of reviewing very quickly just, some of those startling statistics that we always talk about people in the queer community. And just as a note, I use queer as a very umbrella term to include a wide range of sexual orientations, gender identities, expressions, people who are closeted, people who are out, people who are questioning, the entire community, including non-binary and transgender folks. So something that we know just based on some recent data from 2020 the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, that queer adults that meet the threshold for what we call alcohol use disorder is about 21.8% compared to about 11% of the general population. This gives us a little bit of an idea of kind of the outsized impacts that addiction and substance use have on our community. So for instance, for people meeting criteria for opioid use disorder, about 6.7% of queer adults compared to about 3.6%. Weekly marijuana use amongst queer adults is about 41.3%, give or take. There are a lot of contextual factors that go into how that differs from community to community, but that's compared to about 18.7% amongst all adults. So we can kind of, these are numbers from the NIH. Trevor Project does some great research in the community when we talk about teens and young adults, and that's one of the niche focuses of my work in outpatient therapy, is working with queer and trans teens and young adults. When we're talking about alcohol use disorder amongst queer teens and young adults, we see numbers even as high as 56%. It's about half of queer teens and young adults may meet some criteria for alcohol use disorder. We're looking at 1 in 3 who are reporting a weekly use of marijuana, and about 11% who are reporting both the criteria for alcohol use disorder and a weekly use of marijuana. And about 11% of queer teens and young adults report lifetime abuse of prescription medications, so 1 in 10 amongst these. 7 times, you see this number 7 pop up a lot in mental health, but this is the increased risk of suicide among queer teens and young adults who meet that criteria for substance use disorder compared to non-queer peers. So it's really evident from these numbers that this community is being impacted in a very disproportionate way. 7.4% is a pretty stark number when you think that this is the percentage of substance abuse treatment programs that have services directly for the queer community. And we also know from research, this is courtesy of Hazelden, that queer people tend to have more severe substance use when they first initiate treatment and have higher rates of comorbidity, so higher rates of also having depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, PTSD, etc. But the numbers are just numbers, right? They're not really telling the whole story. And they're really not telling the whole story of why this community is so disproportionately impacted. And so I want to take you through some reasons why this may be. The truth is, queer people are not just inherently more prone to being addicted. People in our community are not more prone to using substances naturally or developing addiction any more than other people. But what's going on behind these numbers is that the queer community is experiencing really a large array of unique challenges in our social environments, in our families, in our communities at a national and global level. And it's impacting us in lots of different ways. And we're just going to take a quick look at just a few. So one of the ones that jumps out a lot very quickly is discrimination, dealing with the reality that queer people experience discrimination and exclusion all across the board in lots of different settings. Obviously, this changes contextually depending on where people are, but it's important to note that nowhere are there national protections legally for queer people. Local and state protections do exist, but oftentimes those are changeable based on social trends and fluid climates politically. And we know from research, and this is well established, that discrimination creates feelings of shame and guilt, some resentment, fear, anger, isolation, depression, and a lot of related mental health concerns, increase the risk of suicidality, increase the risk of self-harm. So we know that discrimination has a direct impact on mental health. There's also an issue of religion being very prevalent in public life, and those being institutions that have historically excluded people with queer identities. This becomes an intersection with queer people who are navigating substance abuse, because a lot of institutions that are available for helping people with addiction and mental health are sometimes affiliated with religious communities. And even though many religious communities are open and affirming and have adopted policies that include people with queer identities, that historical experience that many queer people have with religion can pose a barrier and prevent people from seeking their services. There's also something that's very important to think about, is the lack of queer representation in media, or the presence of misrepresentation in media. It's really important to note that even though there has seemed to be an explosion of queer representation in television shows and movies and everywhere, and everyone's talking about it positively and negatively about how many queer stories are being told, so many of those stories are still being told from non-queer perspectives, centering the experiences of non-queer people, and are often altered and tailored to suit the tastes or accommodate prejudices of non-queer audiences. A lot of that representation overrepresents the prevalence of substance use amongst queer people. Oftentimes, queer people are represented in traumatic storylines, using alcohol, using drugs, using them to excess. And this is especially true when we're talking about queer teens. I know Euphoria, that show gets kind of picked on a lot for these representations, but these are actually really having an impact on queer teens, trans teens, who are looking out at the world and saying, what are the acceptable ways that I'm fitting into this community? What are the acceptable ways that I'm dealing with the stress that I'm dealing with? And we also have to talk about the lack of diversity across the board, but about racial, ethnic, ability, and body size diversity really changes expectations of queer people, and they judge themselves against those expectations. We don't see queer people who look like us when we go to the movies or look on a television show. We see our queer community through a non-queer lens, and that can really impact how we view ourselves. And also, homophobia, transphobia, queerphobia are really normalized in American culture. It shocks no one to think that you can be on social media, watch the news, you can just engage with the general public for just a little bit and find some really negative beliefs and opinions and rhetoric targeting queer people. And even people just perceived as being queer. And still in this very enlightened age of 2023, enlightened in quotations, queer people are still often the butt of the joke, are often minimized or exploited in art. And people who speak against queer identities and queer expression and queer equality have national platforms with millions of people ingesting that content every day. This is something that follows my queer teens into the therapy room every single time. This comes up repeatedly. This is something that's putting a lot of stress on queer communities, especially younger queer people. So when we consider the impacts of all of these and really kind of looking at them as a whole, you really start to realize that queer identities really kind of develop under this threat of exclusion and isolation and violence, even within our own families a lot of times. And that this discrimination and negativity can saturate the world around us. The media reinforces these ideas and these belief systems. And unfortunately, historically, queer people have found safety in the few places that they have been able to. And oftentimes in our history in the United States, that's been in bars and nightclubs and places where drug and alcohol use are prevalent. And so what we start to realize is that for a lot of queer people, their first experience of safety and community is related very closely to alcohol and drug use. And even within the queer community, we find lacks of social support, we find divisions, we find gatekeeping and exclusion. And what this really does is really give us some context for those numbers that we saw at the beginning of my presentation. when we see those disparities, when we see queer teens using alcohol and abusing alcohol at greater numbers, when we see young people and young adults and adults using different substances for different reasons. I wanted to share this. It's just kind of a lens that we as clinicians often use to kind of think about when we're treating substance use issues with our clients, and when we're really trying to educate clients and families about kind of some of these bigger factors that often get missed when we really focus on the individual and focus on individual behaviors and experiences. And so all of these things really coming together, those stressful events, the heightened vigilance that those events require, all the internalization of all of those negative ideas and the trauma from those events really create a lot of stress in anyone with a minoritized identity. And this is where we see the intersection of people seeking relief and seeking comfort and seeking connection and seeking some kind of salvation from some of this stress and some of this trauma and some of this vigilance. And substances, unfortunately, alcohol, drug use, prescription drug misuse provide some answers for this and can develop into some very difficult situations for folks. So we're kind of looking at what addiction has looked like for queer people really at that bigger level. And as we go on tonight, I hand off to my co-presenter, to Liv. Liv's going to be talking more about kind of what this what addiction treatment and support looks like when we're really kind of talking now about the individual. But it's really important that we understand that context, this bigger context, and helping people who are living with addiction, living with substance use issues, or families that are dealing with it, realizing that the context of what's happening is happening bigger than just the individual. And so Liv's going to take us through some of those more micro level things and talk more about treatment. But all of this to say, and really the conclusion of all of this is to really keep in mind that queer people living with addiction do deserve our compassion and our understanding and an awareness of the unique challenges that we face. That the experience of a queer person with addiction is not going to be the same as the experience of a non-queer person with addiction. Both are going to be harrowing, difficult, life-changing experiences and struggles. But queer people are experiencing that through a really different context. I appreciate the time to share all of that with you. I hope it wasn't too wordy and academic. You can tell I'm a college professor, so some of that I try to modulate a little bit. I swear when I work with teenagers, I break this down to a lot more fun language, although I do get told all the time that I'm really old. But I really appreciate this. And obviously, if we have questions about this later, but hopefully this gives some context as we move into Liv presenting, and then also hearing from our individual tonight who's going to be sharing some of their own experiences.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Yeah, I really, really appreciate that idea of young queer people, their identity developing under threat. And considering that, some of the statistics that you talked about and kind of the story that you told, how we can continue to, or not even continue, how we can create support within, relationships, families, treatment, and specific interventions as well. So Liv, if you want to kind of take over and, as Jordan said, kind of talk about that more micro level stuff.
Sure. Sorry if my voice is, I have a cold. I have a 6-month-old who has a cold, and now I have a cold. So I don't have slides because I'm not a professor, but I appreciate the lead in. When I was thinking about what exactly I wanted to talk about, I was kind of going through my personal individual experiences, as well as looking at kind of the overarching theme of what I see when some clients come into my office or participate in a specific group, and how that kind of translates and differs sometimes from some other people that don't identify within the LGBTQ community. Just a little personal information about me. My name is Liv Houser. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a lesbian. I work primarily with young adults, mental health, as was said before, mental health and substance use primarily. However, I do work with a lot of LGBTQ individuals as well. And I have kind of found that niche passion within that, because I do think that some of the needs are a lot different. And I really want to kind of shed light on that so that it's kind of more known, right? And the ability to be able to provide like culturally competent counseling and therapy services and be able to provide resources when needed for people that don't know what to do, where to go, or who to ask for help. I'm going to start out with that idea of help and asking for help in general. As many people know, and maybe you don't, so this might be new information, but a lot of people that come in and out of substance use recovery have a really difficult time with asking for help. There's clearly a stigma attached with the substance use disorder and or mental health label in general. However, there is another, oftentimes like societal judgment, as was talked about before, and stigma associated within the LGBT community. So when somebody comes in, first reaches out for help and maybe calls a place for an evaluation or calls a therapist to meet one-on-one, there is a lot of times there can be a difficulty in when that person calls, they don't know exactly what to expect. So there's a lot of different kind of I think really important key factors that go into that first initial interaction. There's the making sure that you're asking specifically about pronouns, making sure that you're asking about what specific name they'd like to be called. Make sure that you are asking about how they identify, gender, any part of that person where they may have been hiding for a really long time, suppressing out of fear, worrying about threat or judgment. You never know somebody's personal experience within the LGBT community. And there's also the aspect of family, and you don't know how family may have either responded or not responded to somebody's personal experience. Once, excuse me, once a client calls and asks for help, in general, in any context, you look at that as like this, the first step in the right direction, right? Admitting that you can't do whatever it is that you're doing that's causing this huge impact on your life, personally, externally. A lot of people come in and their entire life has just completely fallen apart due to substance use. However, what is super important is that within that LGBT community, their life may have fallen apart without the use of substances. Depending on that family relationship, whether that be from a religious context, oftentimes there's a lot of religious trauma, whether that just be by an unsupportive family. Many clients that I have seen, or that some of my fellow clinicians have seen, have been, kicked out of the house or threatened or put in a position in which they were legitimately terrified for their life. And as Jordan had said before, when a person comes into the therapeutic setting, this may be the first safe place that they have encountered, and this first safe person that they have encountered as well. I think that it is extremely important to recognize that upon entering, once a person calls, makes an appointment, comes in and sits down, it's almost reiterating the aspect of safety, asking the questions that maybe they have already been asked, but just wanting to clarify so that they know that they're being heard and understood, and they're in a non-judgmental environment where it's made clear the conversations had in that space are safe. Obviously, there's certain conditions, ethical responsibilities with that that are an overarching theme within the therapeutic community, certain things that need to be disclosed specifically for safety. However, there have been clients that have come in and they have the first time that they acknowledge the authenticity of who they are and are able to explore that is within this therapeutic context that they have reached out and asked for help. It's a process, right? For anybody, I'm going to throw a little of my personal stuff in there, but I think that the amount of times that people within the LGBT community repress their emotions, repress their identity, they basically end up losing themselves, right? To this idea that they have to somehow morph themselves into what is societally acceptable. For me, I personally went through years and years and years of repression. I had this internalized fear that I would allow myself to be authentically myself and then no longer have anything that I viewed as support. So I had this really intense, almost thought pattern, catastrophizing for myself, this isolation and this loneliness. I felt like I was already isolated and lonely. So if I come out, that's just going to mean that I'm more isolated and lonely. And to me, I was like, I'd rather be isolated and lonely and hiding where people can see this person that I want to, the mask, right? The mask that I put on. However, the amount of strength, the amount of resiliency, the amount of courage that a person within the community has to have to acknowledge and accept the person that they are is incredible. And I think that should be acknowledged as well. When it comes to mental health, I could name a million different diagnoses, but I primarily like to focus on symptomology as opposed to diagnosis, just because I feel like sometimes it's easier to explain a little bit. So if we're talking about panic attacks, anxiety attacks, mood shifts, whether that be somebody going into a manic state or a depressive state, hypomanic, any type of potential psychoses, things like that, where a person is battling within their own head this continuous, constant negative self-talk over and over and over again that can be increased by the symptoms of their potentially undiagnosed mental health condition. That adds a layer onto the treatment because you're not only working through the stigma of potentially having a mental health condition or substance use disorder, but also the stigma of being LGBT. So you have to almost, this is more of a person-centered approach, but meeting the person where they're at upon when you first meet them, acknowledging and understanding what they are ready to accept and what they're not ready to accept. Because again, right, I say the word safety 800 times when I do presentations like this, but I just find that to me is my main priority. Anytime I see anybody, but especially people within the LGBT community. I wanted to read something. So I had written a blog and about this specific topic. And one of the focuses that I had on the blog was the idea of safety. And at the end of this blog, I said, clients in this population can have a multitude of difficulties with identity, self-expression, authenticity, fear, loneliness, and self-hate that require validation, understanding, empathy, and compassion. So that sentence in and of itself is my primary focus always. Then we go on to family. I'm going to kind of make that like my second point. So safety, like ethically sound practice, understanding, making sure you're validating, specifically asking for pronouns, name, how that person wants to identify, and exploring what comes with those kinds of conversations in a safe, non-judgmental way. Then we have family. So in regards to family therapy, that's a little bit different as well in the LGBT community, because you first have to acknowledge whether or not the person feels safe within the family systems. That can look like, are they out? Does their family know? Has their family discussed maybe and or talked about a lot of like negative things in regards to that community? Is there a lot of fear? Are they in danger? Do they feel as though if they had a conversation with their family, that something scary, dangerous, something threatening would happen? That's the initial. The initial is making sure that that person feels safe within their family system. And if they don't, that's a lot of times where resources come in handy. The ability to help the person find a community in which they feel safe, whether that be support groups, whether that be intensive outpatient group, anything specific where they can be in an environment with other people that understand, that can relate to that fear, that can relate to the sometimes difficulty with fully understanding your identity, with questioning sometimes pronouns, what they feel comfortable with using, wanting to change them, things like that, that is totally understandable and totally okay. But sometimes you need somebody else that's gone through the same thing to be able to look at that person and say like, hey, that's okay. You can be whoever you want to be. There's nobody should ever tell anybody that they can't identify as the way that they want. They can't use a certain pronoun that they want. They can't dress a certain way. That they can't express themselves a certain way. That they can't love who they want to love. But a lot of times that community aspect is well, I think is also one of the most important things. So if a person has a family that they do feel safe with or comfortable with, excuse me, I always find it extremely important to ask what their boundaries are. So if that person has certain boundaries that they don't feel comfortable discussing, to explore that, but also respect the boundaries of the person. Making sure that there's a conversation or a therapy session set up prior to any family session. And clarifying, what some of the kind of go through and set up a little bit of a game plan in regards to topics or important conversations or things that they really want to work on. Goal setting for family therapy. Once there is like a family therapy session, I think, and a lot of these things that I'm saying can be consistent with therapy all over the board. I just find that within the LGBT community, there are certain nuances that are extremely important, kind of continuously clarifying, making sure that the person feels safe and understood and heard, and constantly making sure and asking those questions, especially when it comes to any type of family work as well. Once the person has a family session, it's kind of like debrief process afterwards, and continuing to advocate for that support, right? In the LGBT community, they talk a lot about chosen family. Chosen family is basically other members within the community that have similar experiences that can be there to help a person to self-discover, give them a hug, be that support system that maybe they haven't experienced in life in general within their own family system. And then when it comes to, I just want to make sure I'm not going to run over. Okay. And then when it comes to the group setting, sorry, lost my train of thought for a second. The group setting in regards to intensive outpatient or residential treatment, anything that would be like when a person comes in for an evaluation and the therapist says, okay, I'm going to refer you to X level of care. That's also extremely important to make sure that you are referring to places that are safe for the LGBT community. Jordan and I had talked last night, and one of the things that just popped up was the idea of, you know, if somebody that is going through transitioning, say, goes into a place and is in the process, but the wards of this place are segmented into male and female. They could very easily try to take that person that is transitioning and put them into the other ward where they're going to feel extremely unsafe. And honestly, probably aren't going to be able to do the therapeutic work that they need to do. And the instinct is going to be basically a trauma response, right? You either run away from, or you freeze and further repress or disassociate, and you just completely disconnect because it's reliving a trauma a lot of times. So when you're referring out, I think making sure that a place is competent in working with the LGBT community. I mean, preferably a place that would have an LGBT track. I know sometimes that can be more challenging. And then also in regards to if it's a group setting, like an IOP, intensive outpatient, or a partial hospitalization treatment, making sure that whatever group that they're getting sent into is also safe. So if there isn't an LGBT group, kind of clarifying with the person, hey, maybe they have a young adult gender specific group. Would you like to do that? Or would you like to do one that has like all genders in it? Or, you know, what are you most comfortable with? Because that's how the person is going to get the best therapeutic support that they can. So ultimately, safety, checking in, advocating, helping the person to understand, non-judgmental approach. When you're referring out, making sure that the person is getting to the safest place that they can, recovery related or mental health related, both. And also with family is checking in with, continuing to ask if this person feels safe, making sure that their family has the ability to work in a therapeutic setting with that person without just attacking, right, or causing any type of potential threat to that person, and allowing the person to be who they are, express themselves how they want, to make that safe, non-judgmental space that the person may have never encountered before. Okay, I'm done. I was like, I don't know
Thank
what I'm transitioning to.
Thank you so much, Liv. Yeah, like when you're like, I'm gonna say safety a million times. Yeah, because it's really, really important, right? Thinking about kind of creating or seeking out those safe therapeutic environments for folks in the community. So prior, just a reminder, if you have questions throughout, we're going to get to the Q&A section shortly. But first, we have Matt, and Matt be a part of the conversation for our community events. We always feature are very grateful for our folks in recovery that come on to every program. So not only are we learning about a new topic, but we're actually hearing a lived experience too. And Matt, I believe this is your second program. I think that I moderated the first one too. So we have we had met before. This time we're on Zoom though. So we're very grateful to Matt for being on and taking the time to share his experience and story with us. So take it away, Matt.
Thank you. I am Matt. I'm an alcoholic. I'm just used to saying that. So, little fun fact: Liv was the one that had my consultation for IOP, and she made me go to rehab, which is like really what I needed because I could not. I was a mess. Like, she can say that, like, I was a hot mess. It wasn't safe to be around myself. And I went to rehab, and I'm gay, by the way. Pronouns are he, him. And, I got into a sober living house. There was 23 other guys, which was very interesting. It was like a frat house without all of the substances. And, she helped me get into a recovery house here in the city. It's a co-ed house, and, we have like everybody here. It doesn't really matter. We have someone transitioning in the house. I think she's great. She's so funny. But, we have open arms here. And, as I mentioned, I live in the city. So I'll get back to that. And that's been a very big part of my recovery. But, looking back a little bit, my family life was definitely chaotic growing up. I've been through a lot. And a lot of times, well, most of the time, I didn't feel safe in my household, and I didn't have the, support or presence of a parent that I needed. I had to figure a lot of things out on my own. And I do struggle to ask for help now, especially. Because I feel like I should be able to do things on my own. But I was just so desperate to feel any other type of way than when I was in active addiction. I was one who almost died, and drank to the point where I was withdrawing, and it was really bad. And it was all because I just didn't want to be present. I didn't want to be there. And granted, a lot of this happened during COVID and, quarantine and having to stay at home. And, I think it would have happened anyways, but I was just one to drink alone. But, without that, being LGBT piece, that would have made things a lot simpler. It wasn't, easy to, I was already out. I came out when I was 17, junior in high school. But, it was something that I really hated about myself. I didn't like that I was, this way. And, when I came out, I didn't have the best response from family. And, now they've come around. But, it was just a lot of that hurt, channeled into my, drinking and drug use. And, as I mentioned, did I mention it before? My mental health. I have a nice little laundry list of mental health conditions, which I'm grateful I'm able to work on now. And that even goes for the family stuff, the safety stuff, especially the alcoholism and addiction stuff and LGBT stuff, just kind of meshing that all together to kind of make sense of it and take what I need from it and learn from it. But when I was actively drinking and using, I mentioned that, I just didn't want to be there. I didn't like myself because I was gay. That was only one of the reasons, but that fits in this context. So, having the identity of being gay and the other identity of being an alcoholic, I'm a participant of Alcoholics Anonymous. So that's what's worked for me. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but the community within that, two pretty, niche groups, I mentioned before I live in the city, and there's a lot of LGBTQIA groups, and that's been a huge foundation of my recovery. It's my network. It's how I stay connected, how I feel like I belong. And, before and, as I moved to the city, I was part of Liv's LGBT IOP, and that's just gone. That was a really nice thing to have because, I liked all the people that I was with in my IOP, but Liv, I just gave you a shout out for the LGBT IOP. So, having that safe space, just to talk about, prevalent issues with being LGBT, that was a game changer because I couldn't talk about that at my sober house. I couldn't exactly talk to my family about it. And, I've talked to therapists like beforehand about it, but it didn't really, do much. They didn't really have the insight that I needed. And, being in the city, traffic sucks, but, being here in, hustle and bustle, I have a lot of resources and I've met a lot of different people. And, I've been lucky that I've been on the path I've been on because I've, been really lucky with all the resources I've been given, utilized, and, the people that led me here, I thank them. And, it's within the community of, being gay, LGBT, the whole umbrella, it can be hard to feel like you're a part of that because it is, even though it's a community, it's so like sectioned out. There's even, discrimination within the whole group. And it is really difficult to find your place. And Pride was this year. I didn't go because I just, wasn't feeling it that day. But, I know a lot of people that went. I know people that organized it. And, they were, pretty excited that there were sober spaces. And, a lot of people utilized those. And it was really helpful. And, just being able to find our little, sober and gay clique. An old sponsor of mine said, the sober and LGBT part of AA in Philadelphia was, he called it the gay AA mafia, which, I thought was funny. But, now that I've been sober, for my sobriety date is February 20th, 2021. So it's coming up on 2.5 years. I've graduated college. I have been through a lot, even in sobriety. And, I've kept up with, sober people, gay people, sober and gay people, it's definitely been worthwhile. And, not everybody has access to these kinds of resources like I have. And, I definitely need to do more work, as a society to destigmatize, substance abuse and LGBT people. I've noticed a lot of backtracking in that recently, and it's disheartening. And especially during my use, that was pretty devastating, because it's like, oh, do we matter? And now that I have people, I have my people, I feel like I do matter. Even with mental health, I tell myself that I don't, but in the back of my head, I do know. It's given me a lot of, footing to be able to discover things about myself and find my little niche. And I don't have to depend on some external source to provide me with happiness or companionship or just reassurance. And trying to think of what else I could say. I mean, I think that's all I've got.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. We really appreciate it. We have received a few different questions throughout the presentation. So I'll start off, Matt, because you were just talking about kind of having your people, right? Liv did a great job about talking, therapeutically about what a affirming space may look like for someone that might be early in recovery, or maybe a loved one of someone that is. How do you find recovery friendly or encouraging or sober community in a social way too? I know, Jordan, you touched on the fact that a lot of those first safe spaces do include alcohol and substances and drugs. So this can kind of be for any of our panelists, is how do you go about finding and cultivating these safe communities that don't involve substance use?
I'd say, I mentioned I'm a part of, Alcoholics Anonymous, but, just anybody in recovery probably knows somebody, especially LGBT people. It's a small world. And, if you talk to one person, they're going to know someone else, and it just kind of, trickles down. And then you eventually find a place where you feel welcomed and at home. Yeah. Oh, that's my take on that. Or it's my take on it.
Thank you.
You can also go on to literally like Google and type in like LGBTQIA meetings, NA meetings, any type of like 12-step support group. And they have they're not in abundance all over the place, unfortunately. But like Matt, I know has like, there's a few meetings in Philly, and I think there's a meeting in like, I don't want to say the wrong thing because I'm going to end up saying the wrong thing, but there's a few meetings outside of the city too. And then I think it is also looking into what's it called? Oh, so like even just general sport groups that aren't, you can find ones that aren't like therapeutically based. I know like the Mazzoni Center in Philadelphia, even just their website. I'm like, like name dropping like competition because they have a substance use IOP too. But they also have a lot of resources on their website too about like different groups. They do different events and things like that, kind of outside of the sober space, but they're like safe spaces, right? They're not just like going to a bar, going to a club, things like that. And I would also say, if you are in a space in which you feel uncomfortable, whether that be just in general in society or in a 12-step group, if you're in recovery and things like that, to look, I always tell people in regards to recovery communities, you don't have to have 800 friends. You can, I always say to look out for somebody. If you come in contact with somebody and you start talking with them and you recognize that they feel like a safe space to you, here I go again, mistake, that they feel like a safe space to you, that you feel like you can be authentically yourself. Really get to know that person. Because like Matt said, right, one person can lead to another person, can lead to another person. And I know that's terrifying. But you can also filter out online, like meetings in regards to like location, size, what kind of meeting they are. There's like certain specific types of meetings. And I think kind of generating a list of those and then recognizing which ones you feel like would be the safest for you to go to. And then getting to know someone, one or two people, or just one, that's fine. Especially in the beginning. Don't feel pressure, right? To like have to make 800 friends. That's a little overwhelming.
Great, thank you. And Jordan just posted a list of Philadelphia area LGBT social groups. He said they said not all sober. So Jordan, I don't know if you wanted to add some more to that as well.
Yeah, and there was a follow-up question in the chat about the suburban counties, and obviously we're in a bit of a privileged space being in Philadelphia. Those of us that are in Philadelphia, there's just a lot of resources and a lot of organizations, but obviously traveling to and from Philadelphia may not be in the cards. And so, but thankfully, I think one of the benefits of the pandemic was that a lot of groups that didn't have an online presence previously have gone online or have posted, I mean, even on Instagram or social media spaces. And I would always encourage, and I encourage my clients that are kind of looking for those kinds of social experiences, because that is a common thing. My office in Philadelphia is in Center City. And so it's like, well, I want to go meet people. There's 100 different places to go, but they're all bars, they're all breweries, they're all, and a lot of events in Center City especially tend to be focused on, young professional happy hour and things like that. There's a ton of athletic organizations, if that's, and of different levels of engagement. But I really encourage my clients when they're in more of an isolated area to really use the internet as a resource and to reach out to some of these organizations in bigger cities, because they're going to be networked with people in Bucks County and Montgomery County and people in Delaware and people in South Jersey. And my other office is in Ocean City, New Jersey. And you can imagine just what a desert of resources there is in that part of South Jersey. And so it is difficult sometimes. And one of the things that I think as clinicians, we work with people who are in recovery, we focus so much on the substance and all of these things, but it's really also about rebuilding that ability to connect to others, and really moving into some risky and creating safety. Obviously, safety is so important at every step of the way, but helping people step out of their comfort zones in different ways without the substance being part of the picture. Absolutely, though. The list that I posted is just kind of a one big list, but there's tons of resources out there. And I would also encourage, we have the Mazzoni Center, we have the Way Center, lots of great organizations in the area. Also, if you're in Trenton, or if you're in North Jersey, or you're in Pittsburgh, reaching out to those resources and really finding, I always really love, one of the things I love about being queer is that we create community everywhere we go. And every time any group of queer people get together, there's always a need for kind of organizing and connecting with one another. And so don't be scared of reaching out and saying, I'm really just looking for something to do on a Thursday night after my AA meeting, or after I get off work and I don't want to go to a bar, and finding out about those things that you may not have heard about in your area, the artistic stuff, the athletic stuff, the fun stuff that's going on in your community.
Thank you so much to all three of you. And speaking of lists and resource lists, we also had a question from a parent. Is there a list of LGBTQIA treatment facilities that you can recommend? So their child has had a few places that claim they are queer friendly, but then once they go in, they experience homophobia. And I know this is a difficult and a complex question, but I think it's a really important one.
So I run an LGBTQIA IOP, but it's substance use and mental health co-occurring. I'm just starting it actually in the beginning of July. So it'll be primary young adults, but honestly, it's probably going to ebb and flow. But substance use disorder and mental health, you don't have to have substance use disorder to be in the group. Primary focus is just going to be on I really don't want to say the word safety again, but safety and community understanding, like Matt was talking about, just that place where somebody can talk about what is going on and be okay with doing that, right? And recognize that it's okay. So me, but I believe that Care and Treatment also has an LGBT track as well. And then I think Malvern Behavioral Health is also, I believe they have, right? Yes, they have an LGBT track as well. So Malvern Ethos in Westchester. It's going to be virtual too, by the way. So anybody really. Malvern Ethos Karen are the three that I know of, that I know actually focus.
And can I just real quick too? And we just want to make sure that everyone knows the follow-up page that we have in the chat that I want to just really show you very quickly. There are so many resources on this page. So the recording of this program will be here probably in the morning. You can get bios on presenters here, or Liv and Jordan and other presenters we've had, but there are so many things you can learn about. There's PFLAG for parents of family members who have a loved one in the LGBT community. There's so many other programs. So here's something about Chester County. These aren't necessarily all substance use and LGBT, but there's going to be a lot of crossover. William Way is a great resource. There's PFLAG. And then we also have just some different treatment providers and some research and, any other programs that we've had. But I just want to make sure that everybody knows. I'm going to put that in the chat again in case anybody joined after I put this in there.
And with those presenters and panelists, I'm going to go ahead and speak on behalf of everyone that's spoken tonight. Our information is up there. So specifically, Jordan and Liv, these are people that know what they're talking about, and I'm sure would be happy to answer questions about finding these spaces. And if you're not, then just privately message me later and say, why did you say that? But So that is also available. Kim, do you have any other questions or follow-up needed? Or if anyone wants to either unmute or put anything in the chat, we have a little bit of time, but I won't keep you here. You don't need to.
I just want to say that I really appreciate everyone sharing. You guys were amazing. This was such a really good program. And I especially appreciated, Liv, you said something about chosen family. And it just makes so much sense. You know, there's a reason that there are questions about treatment specific to this population because of the special needs. I mean, you think about first responders, you think about veterans, you think about parents like me who have a child who's struggled with substance use disorder. We need our people. There's a reason that AA just had its whatever anniversary on Saturday, you know, since 1935. It's just one alcoholic talking to another. This is why it's so helpful. And Matt, I really appreciated how you talked about just the isolation and we really need connection. And I wish we could move the needle a little further with the stigma piece because it is such a barrier. I do think it's getting better, but my God, we have a lot of work to do.
And we had a question come in. As a student intern about to begin my internship, so a mental health counseling student, what are some ways I can provide a safe space for clients who are LGBTQIA as someone in training?
I'll jump on this one as the professor. This is a great question, Maggie. Thanks so much for bringing that up. And I'm so excited to hear that you're thinking about these things and really trying to consider the people that are coming in. I would say that, you know, unfortunately, as someone who teaches in graduate level counseling programs, training therapists to be therapists, one of the things that has always stood out to me is that we don't really prepare a lot of our therapists going out into the field to work with these populations, these vulnerable populations, in really a very complete way. And so there are so many, though, amazing organizations, resources, continuing education opportunities. There's a division of the American Counseling Association, SAGE, which is has a really long name that I won't bore you with, but SAGE, which is the division that's focused on the needs of the mental health needs of the queer community. I would seek out those resources, seek out getting those trainings and the continuing education. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you need to be connected with that. And another thing that I would really encourage is, as you begin your career, Maggie, is to really connect with a queer counselor. Find a queer counselor either in your agency or your practice or in your community, and create some mentoring and mentoring relationship with them, and really be able to connect with them. Oh, thank you, Kara. That's the state level SAGE. But connecting with people in the community, people working, people like me, people like Liv, who are working in the community, who are part of the community. These are going to be the relationships that are going to really help you build. And if you want to reach out, I have a lot of books that I can recommend. But it's really, it's definitely something. And going back to what Liv said, you know, we joked about how much we mentioned safety, but that's really the name of the game. That is really the foundation. And we know as clinicians and as people in recovery that if safety isn't there, nothing else can really thrive in that space. And so it's about honoring someone's identity. It's about seeing who they are and who they want to be, and approaching that and meeting them where they are without judgment, with compassion, with understanding, with an eye to the struggles that they've gone through, the struggles that you're never even going to know about, that they're shouldering, and leading with love and compassion, which, you know, unfortunately is in short supply in our society in general. And so much of how I view addiction is through that lens of connection and disconnection. And it's about connection. People want to connect to the people providing them services. They want to know that they're seen and they're heard, they're understood, they're cared for. And that really begins with the way that you, honestly, Manny, should be approaching all of your clients. But, this is especially important in marginalized communities, communities that historically have not been able to access our services, or to access our services in the same way others have.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So as we kind of wrap up here for the night, if there are no more questions, just want to have some space if anyone has another question to either put it in the chat or unmute. I think we are all good. Something that is kind of coming up for me is that, we started off with some of these pretty staggering statistics and talked about the experience of the queer community being at greater risk for substance use and mental health concerns, and kind of ended talking about some of these really beautiful potential benefits of why it's beautiful to be in the community, right? And what that connection can look like therapeutically, socially, within family, and within recovery. So I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists, Matt, Jordan, Liv. Thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you to anyone that will be watching this recording. And again, please check out our follow-up page, check out all of the wonderful resources that Kim and the rest of the Be a Part of the Conversation team kind of put out there. It's mostly all free and really, really great. And Kim just put it in the chat again. So thank you so much again. And that will be all from us. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Kara. Great job. I really appreciated seeing you again. It's great to see you.
I know. I told Kim before we started, I was like, I'm excited for the program, but I am so excited to see Jordan.
I appreciate that.
Yes.
Good luck.
Awesome.
It seems like you're doing really well. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of
Of course.
this.
Yeah, you were amazing. Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
Thank you so much, Kim. Have a great evening.